For those of you who follow my channel, you know that I've been doing a bunch of interviews with people who work on cryptocurrency, and also with people who are basically skeptics of cryptocurrency, that sort of thing. One of the reasons for this is because cryptocurrency is definitely an emerging technology in terms of things that happen in the industry, and a lot of people are making claims about what it can or can't do, or pushing various agendas about what it should and shouldn't do, all this sort of stuff. And of course, on my channels, we tend to focus on things at a technical level. So my concerns about cryptocurrency are the same as my concerns about just about everything else. Is the technology actually well suited to the problem that it's solving? And one of the things that's true of almost all technology currently being deployed today in the software realm, which is something that cryptocurrency is, it's software. Almost all of it is not built for its task very well. We tend to have incredibly overcomplicated systems almost across the board. And so my concern with cryptocurrency is almost the same as my concern with everything else, which is that when I look at cryptocurrency, I tend to think that they are largely overcomplicating a problem and that the solutions to the problem that you actually want are much simpler, right? So a lot of the problem that I was having with it, technologically speaking, was getting at that root issue and having people in the cryptocurrency communities address those root issues. And while I really enjoyed my cryptocurrency interviews, both with the proponents and the skeptics, and I liked talking to everybody, I found it very hard to ever get past a certain threshold of talking about the technology at the level I actually wanted. For both sets of people, not just for the proponents, but also the skeptics, I found it really difficult because it seems like the things I'm thinking about are not the same things that other people are thinking about. That's not surprising. That's, I occupy a weird space in software where I do tend to think about things other people don't. That's just how that is. So I'm not suggesting that that's weird or unusual in cryptocurrency. Obviously, I'm in the minority for almost all software opinions, so that's totally fine. But what I wanted to do was try to make a video where I clarify what it is I want to talk about in case there's folks out there who think that they can really focus on this and have a discussion about it where we focus mostly on the part that I actually care about. And what I want to talk about is specifically cryptocurrency threat models. I thought a lot about this and I was like, how can I frame this in a way that makes the most sense to people so that they understand what my concerns are and what I want to talk more about? So anytime you're dealing with cryptography, for those of you who are familiar with it, or security, a threat model is usually the thing you start with. So typically when you're looking at something like a security analysis, when you're saying, is this system secure or not secure, there's really no definition for a secure system. It's not something that you can ever define, right? Because your ideas about what may or may not be secure have all these parameters to them. When I talk about, is my computer secure? What am I talking about? Am I talking about from some remote hacker who goes through and bypasses my firewall and hacks into my system remotely and has it run software? Am I talking about that? Am I talking about the CIA or FBI come to my door and they hold me at gunpoint and say, log into your computer or we will shoot you, or we will kidnap your cat, right? What are you talking about when you talk about a secure system? What is it supposed to be secure from? So anytime you talk about security, you talk about threat models. And threat models are when you literally lay out those explicit points. You say, we are trying to build a system that makes it so that Casey's computer is secure even when the FBI kidnaps his cat, right? Or we are trying to talk about a system that keeps Casey's computer secure up to the point where somebody uses physical force to enter his home and do something, right? We specifically say what we are trying to protect against, because without that formal declaration of what we're trying to protect against, the sky is the limit, and we have no idea what we're really talking about when we say this thing does or does not meet those standards of security. Now, the term threat model might not quite fit the bill for what I'm about to say, but it's the thing that is closest to it. And it really does sort of end up being a question of secure systems when we talk about cryptocurrency, so I do think it's appropriate to import the term here, even if other people maybe aren't using that term quite the same in the cryptocurrency space, and here is why. What I want to understand about cryptocurrency is why people seem to think blockchain handles any threat model that is interesting at all. That's the part that I cannot seem to really get to. Because it's not that I don't understand what they're trying to accomplish with things like blockchain. I understand the goals of things like decentralization. What I don't understand is why people think blockchain actually accomplishes those goals, because any threat model I've ever been able to come up with that actually would work in the real world, blockchain does not pass. So blockchain does not secure against any threat model I've ever been able to come up with. And so what I want to do is just lay out why I think that's true really quickly, not in detail, so I don't expect this to be a bulletproof argument at all. What I'm just trying to do is give you the flavor of it so that folks out there who do think blockchain solves some threat model, any threat model at all, that is anything close to what I'm talking about, could then maybe, if you're interested, come do a discussion with me on my interview channel and lay it out for me, because that's really what I want to hear. Furthermore, if anyone's so hardcore that they think they've proven blockchain can't ever do an interesting threat model, so a skeptic who's literally just totally trashed it right down to the provability standpoint, same thing. Can you come on and demonstrate the proof? Because I don't think I'm ready to prove that it can't yet. So I still come at this from sort of an open mind, a relatively open mind. I think I know what the answer is, which is that blockchain doesn't really do anything, but I only think I know the answer, right? I'm not prepared to go to combat there and say, no, I can prove it, and here's all the things. Partly because it's not my job. This isn't what I do. So anyway, let's talk about the two halves of cryptocurrency that I would split them off into. So there's one thing that we can hopefully get out of the way really quickly, which is that there's effectively like elliptic curve, right? So there's curve-based public-private key stuff, right? And elliptic curve-based public-private key stuff, for those of you who don't know, this is just basic encryption stuff. I mean, it's actually quite advanced compared to what we've had in the past. But point being, everyone knows what elliptic curve cryptography is if you've done any work in this space. This part of cryptocurrency is great. This is the part that I wish every bank would implement today. It is completely compatible with our existing financial system. They just don't want to take the hit to do it, as far as I can tell. This part is fantastic and protects against all kinds of threats that we have today in practice, and I love it. So I want to get this out of the way really quickly, that this part of cryptocurrency is fantastic, and everyone should do it. It has nothing to do with blockchain. What this is the ability for quickly generating public-private key pairs. Now, this is very simple to do. Your software is probably already doing this that you run in your machine somewhere. Every time you do HTTPS, for example, you may be literally doing an elliptic curve public-private key pair handshake. There's all sorts of reasons why this is already happening, and we use it all the time, and it's fantastic. What this allows us to do in terms of threat models is right now we use things like credit cards or ACH transfers, things that have an account number, right? And then you use that account number to move money between things. The problem with this is that account number is a literal plain text number, right? We can all see it. If I go to a store and I hand them my credit card and I say, I'm using this credit card to pay, they literally have 100% of the information they will need to make a charge, right? Like, the only thing they might be missing is my zip code, but they probably know the zip code is like right where I'm shopping, more or less, right? Or even if they don't, they can just ask me for my zip code because they often need to enter that in. So once they have the zip code, they can look at the CVV code on the back, they know the number, they know the expiration date. That's all the information necessary to charge a transaction to my credit card, right? It's trivial for them to do. Similarly, whenever you shop online, your credit card may be stored in a database somewhere, or somebody is sloppy about how it's secured, and any hacker who breaks into a system or is able to snoop a connection, they can see that credit card information getting transacted. Now they can generate more transactions, right? This is a terrible, stupid, ridiculous system. It should never be used in the year 2022. It's ridiculous that it is. And so what cryptocurrency does in this space is exactly what we want. Instead of that kind of ridiculous plain text method, what they do is say, look, we know how to do public-private key encryption now. What public-private key encryption does is it says there's a public part you can give out to anybody, and then there's a private part that you retain, and without the private part, you can never do certain things, right? So unlike a credit card number where there's just this thing you give out to everybody and it's the whole thing you need for a transaction, what public-private key allows you to do is give out something to anyone you want and know that you still have a secret part that without which you can do nothing else. So this is great. And the fact that you can generate these pretty much willy-nilly, because elliptic curve is so efficient that you can literally generate these very quickly and do all sorts of things with them. It means that if we switch to a model where we're used to using that for transactions, then we'll be able to do all sorts of stuff. Like you can give out a transaction handle that says anyone who wants to pay me money with this can, right? But nobody can take money out. That's a trivial thing to do with this. You can do other things. You can say, here is a thing I'm going to hand to somebody that allows only this person, right, to take exactly this amount one time from my, account. And you can do that, right? Because we have so much better encryption cryptography technology today than we had 50 years ago, our ability to build exactly what we really do want for transaction authentication is available now, and we should do it. So I want to split that off because I think anyone who argues that this is bad is not making any sense. We obviously want public-private key, elliptic curve, signing of transactions because there's so many things we can do with that. Every bank should be switching today. Credit cards should be this tomorrow. Like, there is no question that this is how everything should work, and it's just like, it's ludicrous to think otherwise. So, there's no question there. I thought that before doing the cryptocurrency interviews. I think that after doing the cryptocurrency interviews, I think it's so clearly what we want, it's fine. So, I don't care about this at all other than to say, please, everyone, let's switch to this eventually. No matter what we do, whether we do, Bitcoin or just, standard US dollar, standard banking system, whatever it is, we want this on the front end for sure. So, this part, no discussion, in my opinion. So the part that is really confusing to me, right, is the part where we try to start doing decentralization, right? So decentralization is the other half of cryptocurrency, and it has nothing really to do with the crypto part, right? There are crypto primitives involved in it, but this part was really very much, the first part was really very much about the core idea of cryptography, which is saying, create various things that allow me to sign something and for you to verify that thing, or to send things between two parties without a third party looking at it. The first part is literal cryptography. There's really not much to it other than the cryptography. The decentralization part is very different. It is not primarily a cryptographic goal. The goal there is not really to do anything securely. Like, that's not so much what it's doing. What decentralization is more about is ensuring that there isn't some kind of a single failure point or authority, right, who can manipulate something or, prevent other people from doing something. It's more like prevention of a denial of service attack kind of a thing, which is not quite cryptography. Cryptography may very well be involved, and for the decentralization schemes that people propose for cryptocurrencies, you absolutely do use cryptography. You use, for example, hash functions, or, strong hash functions are a very core part of a lot of these schemes. But it's worth noting that this is a separate thing from these two. The ability to sign transactions is one thing. The ability to have ways of doing transactions in authenticated ways between parties that are very resistant to the kinds of attacks we see today on credit cards, that is one thing, and it has literally nothing to do with this part right here. This is something that any bank could implement if we actually started caring about it. The Federal Reserve could declare tomorrow that we're going to be doing this, and the banks would have to follow suit, and they could do it without changing much about how banking really works. It's just the interconnects and the way charges work, MasterCard, Visa, that sort of thing. We could do this with existing banking, right? This part is very different. Existing banking is centralized. It requires a number of authorities, right? There's the United States government is an authority on the dollar, right? There's banks, which are authorities on individual account holders' accounts. There's all kinds of different places like clearinghouses and merchant services, all these things. There's tons of little authorities all over the place who are all agreeing in sort of a tree model to federate this, this system of payments. And while they could switch to this, they really couldn't switch to this. There's no obvious clear path of how you do banking looking anything like what it looks like today if decentralization is your goal. So here we come to the part that I get really confused about, which is to say that if we state that one of our goals is decentralization, so we assume, hopefully everyone agrees with me that this we could do with traditional banking, and then we go, well, we also want this concept of decentralization. We don't want there to be single authorities running around who can do various things that we don't think they should have the power to do. I don't have a strong opinion about that one way or the other, to be completely honest with you. I don't know whether it's a good idea to say decentralize or centralize. I do think there's a lot of issues in play, and I think the degree of centralization you want is something you can definitely argue about and all that stuff. But what I will say is I can certainly appreciate some of the things that people are reacting to when they say we want to decentralize. For example, things like financial deplatforming. Saying that you can't send money to WikiLeaks, right? This is a thing that actually happened. Saying that you can't, we won't process credit cards for porn sites or something like this, or, like OnlyFans went through something like this. There are reasons why centralization has significant problems that are, even when a society didn't declare something illegal, these monetary authorities can take steps on their own that make things not illegal to do, but very difficult to do. Because we know in the modern world, everything runs on legal tender, like it runs on money. And if you can cut off somebody's money supply, you basically mean that whatever the thing is that they were doing, they now have to do it as sort of a spare time. Like they have to do it just out of the goodness of their hearts. They can't do it as a money-making exercise, which... And, when you talk about a society that runs on capitalism and tries to be about markets, if you can cut off the ability to pay for something, you basically drastically decrease the size of that thing. Because now people who are good at it can't do it full time as a living, and that just makes the sector smaller and the output of that sector worse. So it gives people a lever. Now, if you think that it's only marginal and it's just the kind of thing where it's never going to affect you because it's only, a porn site or something, it's definitely not true. We saw all kinds of demonetization of things across the board, some of them extremely nefarious. I would highly recommend reading even just completely neutral summaries of Operation Choke Point, for example. Go on Wikipedia and read about that, and you will see, for example, how the government under Barack Obama decided that there was a bunch of things they didn't like, and they went around the country pressuring banks in secret without telling anybody to not process payments or not hold accounts for those business sectors, right? And those sectors touched all sorts of things. Maybe you're the kind of person who's a Second Amendment fan and you own guns. Well, one of the things they pressured were gun merchants, right? So, okay, there we go. There was definitely pornography. They were like, pornography shouldn't happen, right? There's payday loans. There was all kinds of things. They just went through the list of things, and some of them will be things you might agree with. Some of them would be things that are like, oh yeah, I don't like that kind of industry, but other things were things you absolutely do, and you're like, okay, I don't like the fact that the government was able to do this without a vote, without due process. They basically just shut these things down because they had that kind of pressure they could exert, being the ones who control how the money supply works, right? So there's a lot of reasons we might care about decentralization, and I don't know how I feel about it exactly. I have mixed feelings about it. I have a lot of things that I do and don't like about decentralization. I have a lot of things I do and don't like about centralization. So I think it's a bit tough to categorize exactly, but the important thing here is, what if we do want it, right? So you can debate the premise that we want decentralization. That's one discussion. But another discussion is, well, what if we decide that we do? What if we decide that the government is so irresponsible? What if that Barack Obama program gets revisited? Maybe it's already happening right now, because like I said, they did that in secret. We only found out after the fact. What if we have brand new programs that are much more muscular and they shut down all sorts of things, like media enterprises that are critical of the government get shut down, right? You can see why in the future this might be a huge problem. And I would mention that this is all from the United States perspective, because that's where I live. In other countries, it's already a huge problem, right? Those things that I'm saying are hypothetical are already happening in places like China. They're already happening, right? So we can easily see a future where that continues to erode, where free societies continue to go towards more central authority, and they start to limit the access to money as a primary way of controlling things in the short term, so that they don't have to bother going through a political process to do it. We can easily imagine this. It's not hard, and you can just look to other countries. If you happen to live in a country where this hasn't been an issue for you already, you can just look to another country and find it trivially. It happens all over the world, all the time, in lots of governments. So let's suppose we say we do want the ability to do decentralized currency transfer, so that it's much more difficult for a government to step in and artificially constrain someone's access to the money supply. So if you say that you want to have that happen, the question is, does cryptocurrency do that? My argument is that it doesn't do that and can't do that. Other people clearly think that it can. And that is the part of the threat model that I want to talk about. What is the threat model that you have defined that current cryptocurrencies actually protect against, that you think makes it possible to use them to decentralize payments, right? It's a very simple, straightforward process. We do threat modeling for all sorts of other things. If you want to make a coherent argument that you can do decentralized finance using cryptocurrency, you have to be able to show that threat model work, where you've done the full threat model, you've shown why it's important to use something like a blockchain, your particular blockchain that you're promoting, why it really does protect against the threat model. So let me give a simple example of why I think this is actually very hard to demonstrate for things like blockchain. And by the way, I'm not condemning decentralization. Like I said, it may very well be an important thing to try to accomplish. What I'm trying to point out here is I don't think anyone's demonstrated why these systems are actually necessary, what they protect against. So let's suppose that we were talking about decentralization here. And I want to argue that you need something like Bitcoin, something like a Bitcoin blockchain, in order to do decentralized finance. Now, what a Bitcoin blockchain does is a Bitcoin blockchain basically says, well, we're going to have sort of this process whereby we add things, we append things onto a sort of permanent record. Like some people call this an append-only ledger, for example, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to put all the transactions in here, right? And then we're going to finalize one of these things, and we're going to then go on to the next one and put more transactions in here and finalize, right? Now, the method that they've chosen for doing this is using a very expensive to compute hash function. And the hash function always includes some data that you could only have if you knew what the previous block was. So it's sort of a cumulative hash that keeps going. So every time we record a bunch of transactions, right, it has hash information at the top, and the next one has hash information that also kind of proves that it was aware of the previous block. Now, this is very important for a scheme like this, because if you didn't have to do that, you could be starting on any group of transactions at any time. And if we want this to be an append-only ledger, you can understand why we need something from the previous block to be hashed in, because otherwise you can't prove that the person knew what the previous block was at that time, right? So in order to enforce this ordering, we go ahead and we do a difficult to compute hash function, one that's going to take something like 10 minutes, right? And I believe for something like Bitcoin, for example, it's adjusted dynamically, so it tries to keep a certain amount of difficulty with the hashing. And what we do is we just keep appending transactions in this fashion. Now, what is the point of this, right? What does this have to do with decentralization? Because remember, elliptic curve cryptography already gives us all of the authentication we actually need for any possible threat model that doesn't involve you losing your cryptography certificate, right? So from any particular individual's point of view, on their private computer, if they generate a public-private key pair, and they are able to keep their key private, and that's a big asterisk because most people couldn't do something like that, but let's suppose that they managed to keep it private, right? Private star. If they manage to do that, then there is literally no possible way that anyone else can fake a transaction from or to them. They are in complete control of what public keys they give out and what they sign with their private key. So there's no possible way that we can ever have anyone fake a transaction from you without them first stealing your private key. So none of this stuff at all, none of that is necessary for actually securing transactions. What this is necessary for is securing transaction order. So in other words, when I am issuing these transactions, when I say, okay, I'm going to pay $36 to this person and $72 to this other person, well, if I actually don't control enough money to do both of those, if I send one to one party and one to another party and they can't themselves see the other transaction, the parties won't know that that's actually an overdraft. Maybe I only had $80 in my account. I don't have the ability to do a $70 and a $30 transaction at the same, at that time. But those two parties will never know that because I didn't give them the full information, right? They can't really validate that I could do the transaction that I'm saying that I could do. So we don't need any of this blockchain stuff just for people to actually verify that you really were trying to do a transaction. What we need it for is to verify the order in which those transactions go, because without that ordering, we don't know if you could do it. If we don't know all the transactions, in order that you did them, we don't know if you overdrafted. And if you can overdraft, you can basically just make money out of thin air, and there goes the whole system, right? So it's important to understand what we're actually doing with this. It's just that. It's just that. All we're trying to do with this system is make it so that you can't send one thing to one person and one thing to another and hope they never find out, right? If those two people were in contact with each other, they could easily figure out that you did that. But, we're trying to build a system that the whole thing works and everyone's connected to it and it all just goes. We don't want everybody talking to everyone all the time trying to go, oh, did you get paid by Casey? Did you get paid by Casey? Did you get paid by Casey? I have some payment from Casey and I need to figure out if he's telling the truth, right? So the idea here is that the central authority, right? The central authority. In the non-decentralized case, that central authority was there to do that, right? The bank's there to say, hey, I process these transactions in an order. And when you tell me you want to do a transaction, Casey, I look to see, are you going to go below zero at that time? And I record that update, right? It's like an atomic update at that time. They were there to resolve this case. In the decentralized case, we don't have anyone to ask. There's no bank we can go to who's the authority on Casey's account, and we can't say, hey, did he or did he not have money at the time, right now, when we're going to process transaction. So, the whole expensive part, the thing that burns all the electricity, people are up in arms, NFTs are ruining the planet, all that stuff. All of that is not this. This part is cheap, free. We're doing it all the time anyway. This is nothing. There's no electricity cost here. All of it is just trying to make it so that we know these transactions go in order and no central authority is there to verify it, right? That's it. That's the whole thing. So what you need to prove in a threat model sense, if you want to convince me that there's any point to any of this like Bitcoin nonsense, right? because this is all, in my opinion, kind of a giant waste of time, because that's all it does is serialize, right? That's all this thing does. Anyone who tells you that there's any other magic to a blockchain other than serialization, I don't know what to tell you, because it doesn't do anything else. That's all it does. Everything else was already accomplished at this step. So the only thing that this is doing for us, right, is that serialization. In order to convince me that that serialization solves the problem of having a central authority, what you have to do is prove to me that all of the things that we currently rely on a central authority for, this replaces, right? The threat model is all of the things that the central authority currently has to do, you will do, right? And you can do them all with this. If I can find something that we need in this threat model, if there's something that the central authority is currently protecting us from that we need, and we go to this and we find it can't do it, then the whole scheme falls apart, in my opinion. So the goal of any cryptocurrency advocate right now should be to completely enumerate what this threat model is and why an append-only ledger does it, right? Because in general, I would say that, while I don't think hash chains like this are really all that resilient, I mean, we already have seen them get taken over because, if you have enough people, you can manipulate them. They're consensus protocols. So I'm not sure they're really all that good. But even if I assume, well, I'll spot you the fact that hopefully in the future, maybe we've got so many people using this that it's not feasible to mount an attack on them where you have sufficient control, right? 51% control or whatever the control number ends up being for your particular blockchain. Even then, even if I spot you that, I don't think there's really any threat model argument for blockchains. So let me give you a simple example, right? So currently take any dispute that might go through our legal system. So, for example, I go and I pay somebody for a car, right? I say, they're like, I'm selling my used car. I'm like, okay, great. I go and I say, I like it. I test drive it. It seems pretty good. I'll give you 20 grand for it on the blockchain or whatever, right? I go, I do the 20 grand transfer, and I never get the car, right? I never get the car. Now, that person says they did give me the car. I say they didn't give me the car. Right now, what we do is we go to a central authority. That central authority is the United States government if you live here, right? In fact, it's your specific state government. So in my case, it'd be like Washington state government where the transaction would have taken place. And I say, look, here's this proof that I agree that the blockchain will give me a way to go into court and say that I, pay this thing, but so does the current banking system. So there's really nothing that improves there. And I say the person never delivered the car. And they say, well, yes, I did deliver the car, right? A judge is necessary now to adjudicate this case, to weigh the evidence that each of us present and make a decision about whether or not I should have my money refunded. What's the blockchain going to do, right? What's the blockchain going to do for me? Now, some people say, well, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to build a complete legal system on the blockchain. Like that whole process you just said, where there are judges, for example, and juries or something, and you go in front of these digitally. We're going to build a digital equivalent of a legal system. Great. That's an interesting idea. Unfortunately, we now don't need this. All of the things you said before that were so important about the blockchain, like we have to have a way of not having a central authority, because if we had a central authority, then we'd be back to this problem of it being able to control things. So what we need is it all be completely digital so that we hash everything. Well, if we have a dispute resolution where we have people who log on and do this, you're just back to democracy. All you did was just reproduce the current state government online, which is a great idea. I love that idea. I would love it if court cases took place online. Please do it. But guess what? You didn't need to burn any electricity to do this anymore, because now, if we just used a regular consensus protocol, one that didn't involve incredibly expensive hash functions and burning a lot of power and having a very inflexible data structure that pretty much sucks for literally everything except the one thing that you were trying to do here, which is avoid have a central authority, well, we could have just resolved any disputes we had about transactions by going through this other system, which is exactly what we do today, right? So I don't see how we ever get out of the model of dispute resolution going through a human process. And once you have a human process of dispute resolution, you have a government. That's what it is. What are you going to do, right? Let's take an even simpler example if for some reason you don't believe me there. Let's suppose you're doing NFTs, right? We take an NFT and we say, okay, I want to sell this NFT. So I encode the NFT into a blockchain somewhere, right? It doesn't matter which one you're using. You pick one of these blockchains and you put the NFT data on there, and I go on OpenSea or wherever I'm going to go and I sell it, right? And you know what? People really love it because it's an ape on a yacht or whatever the things is that the kids love these days, and it sells for $300,000. And so I get that money and I'm like, yes, awesome. Right? Well, turns out it wasn't mine. Turns out I stole someone else's artwork, right? That they had put it was a graffiti artist. They had graffitied it on the wall of the building that's where I work, and I saw it and I was like, that's cool. I'm gonna go ahead and sell that. So I took a photograph of it and I put it on there, right? The artist is like, hey, that was my $200,000. I want that $200,000. What are you gonna do, right? What's the solution to this problem? Well, maybe you're someone who says, don't worry, Casey, I've got a solution to this NFT problem. What we're going to do is just encourage, and effectively by this, force, all artists to encode anything they ever make onto the blockchain so that way we can check to see if when NFTs come up for sale, if they were actually original. Well, two problems there. One is good luck with that watermarking problem because no one has ever, to this day, made a system that can completely recognize in an automated fashion like an image that's derived from another image. Humans can do this very well, and we don't know how well ML will get at that. Maybe it gets pretty good, but two things, even if you assume that we can do that. Number one, when they're supposed to encode it? What if the picture I took was of them not having finished it yet? Are they supposed to literally, like every paint stroke they do, take a picture of it and upload that really quickly just to make sure? Or maybe they're supposed to stream themselves painting every painting they ever paint onto the blockchain directly so that we can go back and see it, right? Again, even if we could do that, there's no guarantee that any kind of automated algorithm is going to know, right? Is going to be able to take that video and go, oh, this NFT was actually a portion of this thing painted in this video. Like, seriously? And don't even get me started on how much computing power that's going to take energy-wise, right? So again, you're back to the same exact problem. You need dispute resolution. You need this artist to be able to present evidence after the fact, say, that was my drawing. I painted it on this building. Look, this person's not even an artist. They've never painted anything. Of course it's mine, right? And they stole it by taking a picture of it, and here's all my evidence. The judge goes, yes, that's true. Boom, $200,000 transferred. It's solved so cleanly in today. I mean, it's not as good as I would like because you still have to go to court, which takes time, but at least we have a solution. No solution in sight for these decentralized systems, right? Because again, as soon as they try to build dispute resolution into them, you're right back to a government and a court system, which we already have and has to involve humans making these decisions. The whole thing you said you didn't want, which is humans making decisions and having some authority, goes away. And in case it's not clear, the reason it goes away is in order for that process to be able to be valuable to anybody or work, it has to be able to reverse transactions. It has to be able to have the authority to go and take the money back. So everything we say about the blockchain, when I hear people talking about the decentralization, I don't see it. I don't know what threat model it protects against. A simple consensus protocol that had none of this, that didn't waste any energy, that didn't have any kind of stuff other than just basic, we talk to each other so we can get the list of transactions. Just a basic sync protocol, right? That would be much cheaper, much, much, much cheaper, and a lot more powerful because now you don't have to go through all these mental gymnastics to figure out how you're going to do stuff. You just build stuff into the protocol that you actually want, right? You don't have to figure out, oh, how are we going to do this with hash and decentralized? You don't have to do any of that because we're just agreeing on stuff and we have a dispute. Once you get there, none of this makes sense. It's defending against threats we don't have, right? Because I can't think of it. I can't. I've thought about it a lot. I can't think of anything this actually does. So, to conclude, that's what I would most like to talk about. I've given a very high-level version of this, so I don't expect this to be a concrete argument to anybody. I'm not trying to make that concrete. It would be a very long and involved thing with lots of actual technical stuff in here if I was trying to make the complete argument about this, but hopefully you understand the gist. So what I would like to talk about is that. How does this actually, what threat model are we defending against where this makes sense, where blockchain does something? Because I can't find it. All of the threat models that blockchain defends against, they don't actually give you anything as far as I can tell, because we're going to need this other thing that could have handled all those anyway. So you're really just defending against threats you don't actually have if you ever want this system to work for everything else it has to work for if it's going to replace our current financial system, which isn't just about finance, it's about dispute resolution. Dispute resolution is absolutely critical in finance. If you don't have it, it's dead in the water because there's disputes all the time. Right? All the time about who did what in the real world. And those things can't be encoded on a blockchain. You cannot encode whether or not a car physically changed hands, right? Or where that car even is right now is very difficult to encode. And you can keep trying to chase it with more and more tech. Oh, well, we're going to install things in cars that keep track of their locations. And then, we'll say, did you leave it here? And the starters will all be encryption. Sure. At some point, you can take a very specific kind of problem, like the car, and maybe we can get to a point where we almost or most of the time fairly completely solve it, right? But there's no chance you're going to do that for everything. Expand it to now car crashes into another car, crash into a house. Who's liable for that and who gets paid and why, right? The art problem was you can't NFTize the act of painting in a way that makes it so we can tell who painted the thing. There's so many things that are subjective and require analysis of evidence by humans. Not only are you never going to get those in a reasonable amount of time, but in the horizon people are talking about where they're like, we're going to be doing this now. You're not going to do that in 10 years. You're not going to be doing that in 20 years. Most of these problems you're probably not going to do in 50 years. They're so complicated, right? So the reason that our current system is able to handle all that is because it's flexible. It just has humans involved in looking at the situation so it can handle all these things when they come up. Getting all of them handled perfectly and 100% digital so that they can't ever really involve a subjective decision, there's no chance. There's no chance you will get there even in the next half century, right? So that is what I would really love to talk about. If anyone out there who's watching this, who knows a lot about cryptocurrency technology, who's thought about that threat model tell me, please, let's have a discussion and walk through what hashed chains of blocks actually defend against. Because I can't think of anything they defend against that actually you couldn't have just made a much simpler system and then have the dispute resolution that you already needed anyway, right? I can't see it. I can't see it. At best, it's sort of like a marginal, maybe we'll have slightly less disputes because we did this. But at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, but given how much energy we burn, even if you don't think energy is free, it's fungible, right? Meaning we could have been computing something useful, we're not. All of that computing power getting spent on this, it can't be worth it for the slight amount of reduction we would get in our dispute resolution service, right? So if you think you can prove to me why this is important, I would love to talk to you. Please get in touch on Twitter or send me an email, casey@mollyrocket.com. I'm easy to find because this is what I want to talk about. So anyone who thinks they can really give a solid argument for that, I would love to talk about it. So that's it, and hopefully there are some people who do so that we can have this discussion, or maybe there are some people who think they can prove that my intuition is correct, which is that it doesn't actually work. Either way, I'd love to talk to you. Please get in touch, and we'll do an interview. That's it. And thanks, everyone, for listening.